The last light of evening stretched long across the open prairie, brushing the land in gold and purple, as if trying to comfort the weary travelers walking silently across it. Mara Ellison, once the well-kept wife of a hopeful miner, now looked more like a ghost wandering between worlds. Her dark dress was dusty from miles of walking, and her boots worn to the stitching scuffed against the uneven dirt road. But she didn't look down. She couldn't afford to, not with her children depending on her for every step. Little Ella, 6 years old, slept with her cheek pressed against Mara's shoulder, tiny arms wrapped around her mother's neck. Her weight was familiar but heavy, the kind of weight a mother bears with love but still feels in shaking muscles. Tommy, only 4, had fallen asleep hours earlier, slumped in a handmade canvas sling tied around Mara's back. His soft breaths tickled her spine through the thin fabric. They were warm against the cold breeze of the approaching night, a reminder that she had no choice but to keep going. Mara whispered to herself with each step, just a little farther, just a little more. But even she didn't know how much farther she had left in her. Her wagon, her one possession of value, had broken down that morning when one of the wheels snapped at a rut. She had tried to fix it, but the wood was rotten and her hands trembled from hunger. With no horse and no neighbors for miles, she did the only thing she could, gathered her children, tied what little she owned into a bundle, and walked. That had been nearly an entire day ago. The sun had sunk, leaving behind only the faint glow of dusk. The temperature dropped quickly, as plains nights always did. Mara's breath came out in weak little clouds. Every muscle in her back felt like rope pulled too tight, and her legs shook beneath her. She had stopped feeling the blisters hours ago. They had simply become part of her. But the children slept peacefully. Mara tightened her hold on Ella's small body, adjusting her daughter's weight so the little girl wouldn't slip. Her arms burned, but she refused to let her discomfort show. Not when the children had already lost so much. Not when she'd sworn to protect them after their father's accident took everything from them: their home, their safety, their dreams. Her throat tightened with the memory, and for a moment she blinked hard against tears. She couldn't cry now, not in front of them, not when she didn't know where they would sleep tonight. A cold wind swept across the plains, rustling her hair loose from its pins. Mara drew her shawl tighter around her shoulders, though it did little to keep the chill out. Her steps slowed. The road stretched ahead endlessly, a wavering line of earth fading into the dark. Her knees buckled once, and she stopped, panting quietly so as not to wake the children. "Please, just let me make it," she whispered to the empty land. The silence answered her. She took another step and stumbled. Ella slipped slightly, and Mara gasped, catching her child just in time. For a terrifying moment, she thought she might fall to her knees and not be able to stand again. But she forced herself upright, sucking in a sharp breath, and that was when she saw movement on the ridge, a dark silhouette atop a horse. Watching her, her heart jolted. Was it danger? Help? Another hardship? She couldn't tell, but the rider paused. And even from that distance, even through her exhaustion, she felt that whoever he was, he had seen her struggle. He had seen everything. From the high ridge overlooking the long stretch of prairie road, Calder Hayes reined in his horse, a sturdy bay gelding named Flint. The wind whipped lightly at his coat as he surveyed the land below, something he'd done 1,000 times during long rides home. Normally, the sight calmed him: the endless waves of grass, the distant cottonwoods along the river, the quiet hush of evening settling over the frontier dot. But today, something broke the usual calm. A lone figure moved unsteadily along the road. Even from a distance, Calder could tell it was a woman, and something about the way she carried herself made him sit straighter in the saddle. She wasn't just walking, she was struggling. Calder narrowed his eyes. He'd always had a knack for noticing the small details: broken fences, weak cattle, a storm brewing miles away. It was the kind of awareness that came from years of working alone, with no one to rely on but himself and his horse. And right now, every instinct he had told him something was wrong. He clicked his tongue and nudged Flint down the slope, keeping his pace slow and steady. Whoever she was, she had children with her, 2 small shapes clinging to her, limp with sleep. Their little heads rested on her shoulders and back, and even from afar Calder could tell she was staggering under their weight. A woman alone with 2 sleeping children at dusk. That wasn't normal. That wasn't safe. As he approached, the last of the sunlight slid behind the hills, casting long shadows across the road. The woman turned her head slightly when she heard the horse's hooves, trying to straighten up, trying to look stronger than she felt. Calder noticed the tremble in her knees, the way her fingers dug desperately into her daughter's small shoulder. He could see exhaustion etched into her face-cracked lips, hollow cheeks, a kind of pain that only came from days of pushing past one's limits. But despite it, she lifted her chin, meeting his gaze with guarded dignity. Calder slowed to a walk and removed his hat out of respect. "Evening, ma'am." His voice was deep, steady, neither threatening nor overly familiar. He didn't want to frighten her. Women traveling alone had every reason to fear the wrong kind of man on the open road. The widow swallowed hard before answering. "Evening," she murmured, trying to shift the child in her arms as if everything was fine. But Calder saw the truth instantly. He'd grown up with 5 younger siblings, had carried them all more times than he could count, sleeping, crying, muddy, laughing. He knew the way a parent moved when they'd been carrying children for too long. He also knew what it looked like when someone was moments away from collapsing. He scanned the road, looking for her wagon or horse. There was none, only a small, tattered bundle tied at her hip. That told him everything. "Your horse wander off?" he asked gently. She hesitated, then softly shook her head. "No horse, no wagon either," she said with a tired, embarrassed breath. "Just my feet." Calder felt something tighten in his chest. Not pity. He didn't offer pity. What he felt was respect and concern. This woman had walked miles, carrying the kind of weight that could break a strong man's back, let alone a grieving widow. He dismounted slowly, keeping his movements calm so she wouldn't think he meant harm. "You look like you've carried the world today." She gave a small, fragile smile, but her legs wobbled again, and Calder stepped forward instinctively, ready to catch her if she fell. He didn't touch her yet, waiting for permission, for trust. He didn't know her story. He didn't know her name. But as he looked at her, this thin, exhausted woman, trying to be stronger than her breaking body, he knew one thing. He wasn't about to ride past and leave her to fall in the dark. Not tonight. Not ever. For a long moment, neither the woman nor the cowboy spoke. The prairie wind rustled through the sagebrush, carrying the quiet sounds of dusk. Calder stood a few feet away from her, close enough to help if she fainted, far enough not to alarm her. He saw the stubborn lift of her chin, the quiet pride in the way she squared her shoulders. Despite the crushing weight of the 2 children she carried, she didn't want to appear weak. She didn't want to appear needy. He understood that more than most. "Ma'am," Calder began, his voice steady and respectful. "You sure you're all right?" "I'm fine," she answered quickly, too quickly. But the tremor in her knees told a different story. Exhaustion clung to her like a second skin. Her breath hitched as she shifted the sleeping boy on her back, tightening the sling that cut painfully into her shoulders. The little girl's head slid slightly against her neck, and the widow adjusted her carefully, with the instinctive tenderness of a mother who carried exhaustion like a secret. Calder saw it all, and he saw the moment she nearly fell. Her foot slipped on a loose patch of gravel. She gasped, the sound sharp and panicked, as her body pitched forward. Instinctively, Calder moved. He caught her elbow gently before she hit the dirt, careful not to startle the sleeping children. "Easy," he murmured. She stiffened in embarrassment, her cheeks flushing under the dust. I'm sorry," she whispered, though she had nothing to apologize for. "I just lost my footing." Calder shook his head. "You're worn down. Anyone can see that you need rest." She straightened again, reclaiming her arm, pride refusing to let her lean on him. "I can manage. I just need to reach the next town." He glanced toward the empty, fading horizon. "That town is nearly 10 miles from here." She exhaled shakily. Even she knew she couldn't carry 2 sleeping children 10 more feet, let alone 10 miles. But mothers desperate, cornered mothers often pushed themselves beyond breaking before admitting defeat. Calder took a slow breath, softening his features. "Ma'am, let me help." Her jaw tightened. She shook her head. "I don't want charity." "It ain't charity," he replied evenly. "It's being human." She swallowed hard, looking down at her daughter's small hand curled against her collar. She didn't want her children to see her weak. She didn't want anyone thinking she couldn't take care of them. She had already lost her husband, her home, her security. She wouldn't lose her dignity too. "I can do it," she whispered, though her voice trembled. Calder stepped closer, and his words came gently, but firmly, words spoken in a tone that could both soothe and command. "Ma'am, I can carry them all." Mara froze. Something about the way he said it, without judgment, without hesitation, without making her feel small, hit her harder than exhaustion ever had. It wasn't pity. It wasn't a man stepping in to take over. It was an offer made with respect, and with a strength she hadn't felt from another human being since her husband died. Calder crouched slightly, slipping one arm beneath the sleeping girl and the other under the boy. With surprising ease, he lifted both children, Ella settling naturally against his broad shoulder, Tommy resting securely in the crook of his arm. Neither child stirred. Mara stared, stunned. He stood there holding them as if they weighed nothing, as if carrying exhausted little souls across miles of land was something he had done every day of his life. You don't even know us," she whispered. "I don't need to," Calder replied simply. "You're a mother on a hard road. That's enough for me." Mara pressed her fingers to her trembling lips. For the first time in months, she felt something loosen in her chest, something heavy, something painful, relief, gratitude, and the faintest flicker of hope. Calder adjusted the children gently, looking at her with steady brown eyes. "Ma'am," he said softly, "let me help you walk the rest of the way." For the first time, she nodded, and just like that, the loneliest part of her journey ended. The prairie night settled fast, wrapping the land in a quiet, breathless darkness. After lifting the children with an ease that still amazed Mara, Calder led her off the main road toward a cluster of cottonwoods, standing like silent guardians over a small clearing. He moved with the confidence of a man who'd walked this land his entire life, guiding her through the dim light as if he could see even in the shadows. "We'll make camp here," he said softly, careful not to wake the sleeping little ones resting against his chest and shoulder. Mara followed, her legs trembling. Now that she wasn't carrying the children, exhaustion flooded her body with an almost painful force. Relief felt dangerous. She wasn't used to letting go of anything, even for a moment. Calder lowered the children to the ground with surprising gentleness. He cleared a spot under the trees, laid out a thick wool blanket, and arranged them so their small bodies were tucked safely between its folds. He even brushed a curl of Ella's hair from her forehead, the gesture tender but respectful. "I don't know how to thank you," Mara whispered, kneeling beside her children. "You don't have to," he said. "They're buttoned here. You're not far behind." He moved to gather dry wood scattered around the clearing, and within minutes, sparks began to dance. Calder coaxed the flames with the patient skill of a man who'd slept under the open sky more nights than under a roof. Soon, a steady fire crackled, its warm glow softening the hard lines of the cowboy's face. Mara sat close to the fire, though not too close to him. She still didn't know him, not really, and caution had been her only companion since her husband's death. But something about Calder's presence eased the tightness in her chest. He wasn't overbearing. He didn't pry. He didn't treat her like a helpless stray left on the roadside. He simply helped. Calder reached into his saddlebag and took out a tin of beans, a strip of dried meat, and a small pot. With practiced hands, he set them over the fire, stirring occasionally as the smell of warm food drifted through the cold night. Mara's stomach twisted painfully at the scent. She hadn't eaten since dawn, and even then it had only been a piece of stale bread she saved after giving most to the children. "You hungry?" he asked, without looking at her. "I can wait," she replied reflexively. "Children first." Calder let out a small breath, a half sigh, half chuckle. "I figured you'd say that." He ladled a generous portion into a tin plate and set it beside her. "Eat. They're asleep. They'll get theirs when they wake." Mara hesitated, then hunger won. The warmth spread through her, melting the cold knots in her stomach. She closed her eyes briefly, unable to hide the relief. Calder watched without judgment, tending the fire quietly, giving her space to eat in peace. When she finally finished, she wiped her mouth with the back of her hand, embarrassed by how quickly she'd eaten. "Thank you," she said again, her voice softer now, "for the food, for everything." Calder shook his head, just doing what anyone ought to. But Mara knew better. She had met plenty of people since her husband's passing, people who turned away, people too busy, too afraid, too selfish to help a widow with 2 children. Most folks wouldn't stop. She murmured. Calder poked the fire, sending a swirl of sparks into the night. "Then most folks ought to take a long look at themselves." His words were simple, but the sincerity behind them made her chest tighten. As the fire warmed her chilled bones, she found herself telling him things she hadn't spoken aloud in months. How her husband died, how the debts swallowed everything, how she'd tried to rebuild for the children's sake but kept losing ground. Calder didn't interrupt. He didn't offer empty comfort. He just listened quietly, respectfully, his eyes reflecting the firelight. When she finally fell silent, he spoke in that same steady tone. "You're stronger than you realize." Mara looked down at her sleeping children. For the first time in a long while, she didn't feel alone in the world. Calder added another log to the fire, its soft glow wrapping the clearing like a blanket. "Rest now," he said gently. "Tomorrow, we'll ride somewhere safe." And for the first time since her life fell apart, Mara believed she might actually reach that somewhere. Morning arrived with a strange heaviness, the kind that warned seasoned riders and ranchers that something fierce brewed in the sky. Calder noticed it the moment he stepped out from beneath the cottonwoods, stretching the ache from his shoulders after keeping watch most of the night. The air was thick and unmoving, clouds gathering like dark bruises on the horizon. A storm was coming. He glanced back at the clearing where Mara slept, curled beside her children. Even exhausted, she'd kept a protective arm around both of them, as if she feared the night itself might steal them away. The cowboy's chest tightened at the sight. A woman shouldn't have to guard her babies from the world alone. Flint, his horse, pawed at the ground nervously and tossed his head. Calder ran a calming hand down the gelding's neck. "Easy, boy. We'll be moving soon." By the time Mara stirred awake, the sky had dipped into a deep, threatening gray. Wind rolled in, sweeping through the trees with a low whistle, carrying the thick scent of impending rain. She sat up slowly, blinking against the dull ache in her back. "Is something wrong?" she asked, her voice still raspy with sleep. Calder nodded toward the sky. "Storm's coming in fast. We need to get moving before it hits." Mara's heart tightened. She hated storms. They reminded her too much of the night she learned her husband wouldn't be coming home. But she didn't let the fear show. Instead, she gently woke Ella and Tommy, whispering soothing words as they rubbed their sleepy eyes. Calder saddled Flint quickly and secured their few belongings. The children were still groggy, clinging to their mother. Mara instinctively began to lift Tommy into her arms, but Calder stepped forward. "Let me," he said softly. She hesitated, dulled, pride dying hard yet. The weight of the storm clouds pushed her to accept his help. Calder lifted both children effortlessly and placed them on the horse's back, situating them between the saddle and himself. He tied a blanket around them to shield them from the wind. Mara mounted behind him, gripping the saddle horn. It felt strange to rely on someone else's strength, but as the first rumble of thunder shook the sky, she pressed closer, seeking safety. The rain came suddenly. A cold, punishing sheet of water crashed down, drowning the landscape. Flint snorted and pushed forward, his hooves splashing through mud that hadn't existed minutes earlier. The wind cut through their clothes, and every thunderclap made Ella latch tighter onto Calder's coat. "It's all right, little one," Calder murmured, his voice steady even against the roar of the storm. "Just hold on, I got you." Mara felt every word deep in her bones. Dot lightning ripped across the sky, illuminating the rolling plains. They were still miles from the next town too far. Calder realized, with 2 frightened children and a storm this wild, "We ain't making it to town." He called back to Mara over the pounding rain. "But the ranch is closer, safer." "The ranch," she echoed. "My place," he clarified. "We'll have shelter, food, a fire. The storm will tear through these roads if we stay out here." Mara looked at her children, shivering, frightened, clinging to the cowboy who had already carried them through so much. She had no room left for hesitation. Trust wasn't easy, but survival demanded it. "Yes," she said, her voice barely audible above the storm. "Take us there." Calder urged Flint forward, steering through the muddy trail as wind whipped at them. The horse pushed onward, strong and steady, as if sensing the urgency of his precious cargo. With every mile, the storm worsened. Rain stung their faces like needles. Lightning cracked so close it shook the earth. But Calder never slowed, never faltered, shielding the children with his own body. Mara tightened her arms around her children and whispered promises to comfort them, but inside, she whispered another truth to herself. This man was not just a stranger anymore. He was their lifeline. By the time they reached the first fence line of Calder's ranch, the storm raged at full force, but hope finally glimmered through the downpour. They had made it because Calder refused to let the storm take them. By the time the small group reached the first wooden fence of Calder's ranch, the storm had swallowed the sky. Rain hammered down so hard it blurred the world into streaks of gray. The children whimpered softly beneath the blanket, and Mara's arms were numb from holding them close. but Calder never loosened his grip on the reins. His jaw was set, his shoulders braced against the storm as if he'd fought 1,000 like it. "Almost there," Calder murmured, his voice barely audible over the wind. A few minutes later, the shape of the ranch house emerged steady and glowing faintly with lantern light that cut through the darkness like a promised dot. Calder brought Flint to a halt under the porch awning. In one smooth motion, he swung off the horse and lifted both children down, holding them close so the rain wouldn't soak them further. Mara slid down next, her legs nearly giving out from exhaustion. Before she could collapse, Calder steadied her with a gentle hand. "Easy, you're safe now." The door opened, and a stout, grey-haired woman stepped out. Mrs. Rowan, Calder's longtime housekeeper, was fierce in both loyalty and temperament. She gasped when she saw the drenched newcomers. "Merciful heavens, Calder Hayes, what have you dragged in this time?" she exclaimed, though her voice was more startled than angry. "A storm's no place for a mother and 2 little ones," Calder replied simply. Bites. Mrs. Rowan's expression softened instantly. She bustled forward, ushering them inside with the urgency of a hen gathering wet chicks. "Bring the children in," she fussed, throwing blankets from a nearby trunk onto a rocking chair. "They're soaked to the bone." Calder carried Tommy, who clung to him sleepily, while Mara took Ella's hand and followed. Inside, warmth hit them like a physical embrace. The crackling fireplace filled the room with golden light, and the scent of dried herbs and warm bread hung in the air. Mara felt her throat tighten. She hadn't been inside a warm, safe home in months. Mrs. Rowan wrapped the children in quilts, so soft they seemed to swallow their small frames. She clucked her tongue and muttered, "Poor babies," and "Poor mother," as she dried their hair with gentle, practiced hands. Mara whispered, "Thank you, truly," and her eyes glistened with gratitude she couldn't hide. "Nonsense," Mrs. Rowan said briskly, but her voice trembled with sympathy. "Anyone decent would do the same." Calder, meanwhile, peeled off his soaked coat and tossed it over a chair. His hair dripped down his forehead, his shirt soaked through, but he didn't seem to notice. He knelt beside the children, checking their hands and faces to make sure the cold hadn't bitten too deeply. Tommy's small fingers curled around Calder's thumb. "You saved us," he mumbled drowsily. Calder's features softened in a way Mara hadn't seen before. "Just got you out of the rain, little man." Ella leaned her head against Mara's arm, but her eyes drifted toward the cowboy. "Mama, he's nice," she whispered, with the innocent surety of a child. Mara's breath caught. She looked at Calder, the quiet strength in him, the gentleness hidden behind his rugged exterior, the way he checked the fire and then returned to make sure she was all right too. She had met many men since. Her husband died, merchants drifted, lawmen, but none had carried her children through a storm without asking for anything in return. Mrs. Rowan soon ushered Mara into a warm corner, offering her a wool shawl and a steaming cup of broth. "You're safe here," she assured. "Calder doesn't bring just anyone under this roof. If he brought you, it's 'cause you needed it." Mara's fingers tightened around the warm cup. She didn't fully understand how she ended up here, protected and sheltered by a man she'd met only a day ago. But she felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Relief, belonging, hope. Meanwhile, Calder stood near the door, watching her quietly, not intruding, not hovering, just making sure she didn't falter. And Mara realized something. This ranch didn't just save them from the storm. It might save them from the loneliness that had shadowed their lives for far too long. The widow realizes the cowboy is more than a helper. He might be her last hope. ****. Night settled softly over the plains, brushing the horizon with shades of indigo and silver. The ranch house that belonged to Eli Morgan stood as a warm, glowing silhouette against the darkening sky. A lantern hung by the door, swaying gently in the cool breeze, its light an unspoken welcome. For Clara, who had been drifting from place to place, surviving on worn hope and dwindling strength, the sight felt unreal, like a scene from a life she no longer believed she would ever live again. Eli pushed the old wooden door open with his shoulder, still carrying both sleeping children with steady, protective strength. Clara followed close behind, feeling a weight in her chest, not of fear this time, but of something she hadn't felt in years, the sense of being safe. Inside, the ranch house smelled faintly of pine, saddle soap, and fresh bread. A fireplace crackled with low embers. The place wasn't fancy, just a neat, sturdy home built by a man who lived simply, but to Clara, it felt like a palace. Eli set the children gently on the guest bed, first Lily, then Samuel. arranging blankets around them with surprising tenderness for a man whose hands were roughened by rope and years of ranch work. Clara watched him from the doorway, her fingers lightly touching the frame, as though she needed something solid to keep her standing. A memory flashed through her mind, her late husband, coughing himself weak, still trying to reassure her everything would be okay. They had lived simply too, but with warmth and love. She didn't let herself think of those days often. The ache was too deep. But now, watching Eli, she felt a mix of comfort and confusion stirring in her heart when he finally stepped away from the children. He noticed her watching. She looked away quickly, embarrassed at being caught staring. "They're safe," Eli said softly, "and they'll sleep through till morning. Kids do, when they know they ain't gotta worry." Clara nodded, though her eyes glistened. "It's been a long time since they've felt that. Since I've felt that." Eli didn't push, didn't pry. He simply motioned toward the kitchen table. "Sit. Let me get you something warm." He ladled stew from a pot simmering on the stove. It was a simple meal: beans, carrots, meat, but to Clara it tasted richer than anything she'd eaten in months. Hunger and relief combined, and the first spoonful nearly made her cry. Eli sat across from her. "You're safe here," he said. "You got my word." She studied him, this quiet cowboy who appeared out of nowhere at the exact moment she needed someone most. A stranger willing to lift her children as though their weight meant nothing. A man who saw her exhaustion without judgment, her struggle without pity. "Why are you doing this?" she finally asked. "You don't know us." Eli leaned back slightly, eyes calm and sincere. "Doesn't matter if I know you. You needed help. That's enough for me." His words were simple, but they slipped past her defenses like water finding cracks in dry earth. "You remind me," she whispered, "that there's still goodness out there. I had started to forget." Eli didn't smile, but his eyes softened. "Then we'll help you remember." For the first time in years, Clara felt her breath come easy. The walls she had built around her heart walls she thought were and shifted, cracked, and let in the smallest flicker of warmth. She looked toward the sleeping children, then at Eli. Maybe, just maybe, this cowboy was more than a helper. Maybe he was the one her heart had been slowly waiting for. Morning light drifted gently through the small guest room window, washing the ranch house in soft gold. Clara opened her eyes slowly, uncertain at first of where she was, but the scent of brewing coffee and the sound of clinking pans grounded her the cowboy's home, Eli Morgan's home, a place safer than any she had known in months. Her children were still curled against her, warm and peaceful. Lily's tiny hand rested over Clara's arm. Little Samuel's breath was steady and deep. For a few precious moments, she simply watched them sleep. Last night had been the first time in a long time she hadn't stayed awake listening for danger, worrying over where they would go next, or wondering if she had failed as a mother. A soft knock sounded before Eli peeked through the door. "Breakfast is ready," he said gently. "No rush." Clara whispered a thank you, touched by his quiet respect. After the children woke and dressed, she led them to the kitchen. The table was covered with warm biscuits, fresh butter, eggs, and sliced apples. It wasn't just food, it was generosity, care, and comfort laid out in plain view. Lily climbed eagerly into a chair, while Samuel clung shyly to Clara's side until Eli knelt down and offered him a wooden horse he had carved years ago. "You can keep it," Eli told him. Samuel's eyes widened. He looked at the toy, then at the cowboy, as though seeing him as a friend for the first time. Clara's heart tightened. Through breakfast, she watched her children laugh. As Eli taught them how to stack biscuit pieces like tiny cabins, their joy was raw and real, something she feared they had forgotten. But then, reality crept in. After they'd eaten, Clara stepped outside to breathe the morning air, facing a truth she had avoided since last night. The road was still waiting. The problems she carried hadn't vanished. She couldn't stay here not without burdening the man who had already done so much. Eli stepped beside her, resting his hands on the porch railing. He didn't speak at first. He seemed to sense the storm in her mind. Finally, Clara whispered, "We can't stay. You've done more than enough. We'll be on our way after the children rest." Eli looked out toward the open fields, then back at her. His voice was quiet, but steady. "You think I helped you for just one night?" She swallowed, unsure how to answer. He turned to face her fully. "Clara, I meant what I said yesterday. I can carry them all. Your children, your burden, even your fears." He paused, letting the words land. "But only if you let me." Her breath trembled. "Eli, you barely know us." He shook his head gently. I know enough. I know you're a mother doing everything she can. I know those kids are good kids who just need a chance to feel safe. And I know you've been walking a long, hard road alone. Clara felt tears sting her eyes. You don't have to walk it alone anymore, Eli said softly. She looked toward the yard, where Lily and Samuel now played with the wooden horse. She saw their smiles, unburdened, full of hope. She saw the ranch house behind her warm, strong, steady. She saw Elith, a man who stepped into her life carrying her children as if their weight was nothing. And she realized something. Maybe this wasn't charity. Maybe it was the beginning of a new life. Clara met his eyes. If he stay, what then? Eli gave a small, earnest smile. Then we build something. Together. A single tear slipped down her cheek. But for the first time in months, it wasn't from fear or exhaustion. It was from hope. Clara nodded, her voice barely a whisper. Then, we'll stay. Eli breathed out slowly, relief and warmth softening his face. And in that moment, on a quiet porch under the rising sun, the cowboy who said, I can carry them all, carried something even greater. A mother's trust, a widow's heart, a new family's future.